Welcome. This is the summary for Turkish economy, chapter 3, which is public sector and fiscal policy. When we try to measure the share of public sector in an economy, we need three types of data for measuring the public sector. These are public expenditures as a share of GDP, public revenues as a share of GDP, and the level of public sector employment in total. But let's look at the role of state in Turkish economy. And we mainly divide the place of state in an economy as a socialist state or a liberal state. A socialist state requires central planning and a very high level of controls on private sector. In contrast, a liberal state requires free market and minimal level of government intervention. Before 1946, Turkish economy was much closer to a socialist state, and it started moving towards a liberal state. And after 1960 and 1980, Turkish economy became much closer to a liberal state form. But the real change towards a liberal state has happened after 2000s. And we can see these in the following figures and tables. So let's look at the consolidated budget expenditures in Turkish economy. We can see here that current spending and investment expenditures has decreased since 1990. The largest part of that decrease happened between 1990 and 1995. We can see this from here. And the same is true also for investment in here. In terms of transfer payments, we had an increasing trend, and similar to current spending and investment expenditures, transfer payments went through a significant change between 1990 and 1995. Also, there was a sharp change in non-interest expenditures, which we see in here. It went from 79.2% in 1990 to 66.3% in 1995. Yet it started increasing and reached to 91.5% in 2017. We also see that there is a strong decrease in interest payments, which we see in the last row. It was 20.8% in 1990, jumped to 33.7% in 1995, and ended with 8.5% as of 2017. When we look at the public sector in terms of their revenue, their main source of revenue, which is taxes, we see that taxes on income and earnings account for about 25%, 1/4 of the whole. We also see that taxes on property account for about 2%. The taxes on goods and services account for 35%, which is much higher compared to other developed nations. And the taxes on international trade and transactions account for about 15%. And lastly, stamp tax and fees account for about 4 to 5%. Note that taxes on goods and services are significantly higher than taxes on income and earnings. When we look at the total tax revenues in terms of percentages of GDP, we see that the value for Turkey was 14.5% in 1990, and it jumped close to 25% in 2017. These rates are much higher in countries like Sweden, Denmark, Finland. Actually, they are more or close to double the values of Turkey. And there are also less values for Argentina, Mexico, and Singapore. So Turkey is one of the Turkey has one of the least values in terms of total tax revenues as a percentage of GDP in OECD countries. When we look at the public sector borrowing requirement, we see that it was 6.46 in 1980, and in the next 5 years it went to decrease to 2.62%, but it started increasing again and reached to 11.36 in 1999 and 11.80% in 2001. But after the early 2000s, it started falling, decreasing, and when you look at this part of the table, you can see that it only jumped to 4.81% in 2009, and except that it remained much less compared to previous years, especially compared to 1980 and 1990. In terms of privatization, the privatization era started after 1980 in Turkey, and it went through this process as we see in the figure. And the highest value in this figure was captured in 2013 with the 12,486 million US dollars, and after that it started decreasing, and we only capture 116 million US dollars of privatization in 2019. So in terms of government spending, Turkey also is one of the least in OECD countries, in advanced countries, similar to the tax revenues. You can see here that the leading country here in terms of government spending as a percentage of GDP, the leading country is Sweden, followed with Denmark. We see here Finland, Belgium. Note that these countries also are the leading countries in total tax revenues. So when countries gather more tax revenues, they have the ability to spend more as governments. So these are closely related variables.